The city lights stretched out like a sea of stars below the massive glass windows, but Thomas Crane wasn't looking at them. He sat in his penthouse office, surrounded by the kind of luxury most people only dreamed about. Yet his eyes were fixed on something small resting in his palm. A red toy car. Scratched, worn, with one wheel slightly bent from too much love and play. 3 months had passed since the accident. 3 months since his world shattered. His wife Catherine and their 6-year-old son Daniel were gone, taken in a moment on a rainy Tuesday afternoon when a truck ran a red light. Thomas had been in a board meeting, making decisions worth millions, completely unaware that his entire reason for making those millions was slipping away. Now, the fortune meant nothing. The empire he'd built, the tech company that revolutionized cloud computing, the billions in the bank, all of it felt like a cruel joke. What good was any of it when he couldn't use a single dollar to bring them back? The people around him had learned to stay away. His assistant delivered messages through email, too afraid to knock on his door. The board members communicated through lawyers. Even his sister had stopped calling after he hung up on her for the 4th time. Everyone walked on eggshells, and honestly, Thomas preferred it that way. Their pity made his skin crawl. Their sad eyes reminded him constantly of what he'd lost. He wanted to be left alone with his grief, his anger, and this tiny red car that still smelled faintly of his son's strawberry shampoo down on the ground floor. In a world Thomas barely acknowledged existed, Maria Rodriguez was having a difficult day. She'd worked as head of housekeeping for the Crane properties for 15 years, managing cleaners who maintained Thomas's penthouse, office building, and countryside estate. She was good at her job and visible when needed, efficient and discreet. But today, Maria had a problem. She needed $5,000 by week's end for her mother's surgery, and her savings were $3,000 short. She'd picked up extra shifts, but it wasn't enough. The hospital wouldn't wait. Her daughter Isabella had offered to help. At 19, Isabella was home for spring break from community college where she studied business. She worked 2 part-time jobs already, barely sleeping between classes and shifts. Now she wanted to take a week off school to work alongside her mother, earning whatever she could for the medical bills. Maria had resisted at first. She knew the rules of working in Thomas Crane's world. Stay quiet, stay invisible, never make eye contact unless necessary, and never bring personal problems into his space. Since the accident, those rules had become stricter. Employees who'd expressed condolences had been met with such cold fury that 2 quit on the spot. One security guard simply said, "I'm sorry for your loss," and was escorted out within the hour. But desperation makes people take risks. Maria finally agreed to let Isabella work for 1 week under strict conditions. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't look at Mr. Crane if you see him. Clean quickly, thoroughly, and get out. Pretend you're a ghost. Isabella listened to her mother's warnings as they rode the elevator up on her first day. She'd seen Thomas Crane on the news, the brilliant entrepreneur who'd built a tech empire before 30, the billionaire who still coded late into the night, the family man who'd shocked everyone by being a hands-on father despite his wealth. She'd also seen recent photos where he looked like a different person entirely, gaunt and hollow-eyed. The penthouse was beautiful and silent. Isabella followed her mother through museum-like rooms, each surface perfect and untouched. Her mother moved efficiently, cleaning what was already clean. Isabella tried to mirror her movements, quiet and quick. For 2 days, it worked perfectly. Isabella saw Thomas Crane only once, from a distance, walking like a ghost in his own home. She kept her eyes down, and he never glanced her direction. She began to relax. On the 3rd day, her mother sent her to dust the library. The library was massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows and walls lined with expensive books. She was dusting a shelf when she heard the door open. She froze. Heavy footsteps crossed the floor, but didn't leave. They stopped near the windows. Isabella stayed perfectly still behind a bookshelf, barely breathing. She could leave quietly, slip out while his back was turned. Then she heard it. A sound so soft she almost missed it. A sharp intake of breath, then another. She knew that sound. She'd made it herself, many times, after her father died when she was 12. It was the sound of someone trying not to cry and failing. Every instinct told Isabella to leave. Her mother's warnings echoed in her head. This wasn't her business. She should slip away and pretend she'd never been there. But she'd been that person once, crying alone, convinced no one cared. And something in that sound made her feet move before her brain could stop them. She stepped around the bookshelf and saw him at the window. Thomas Crane, one of the richest men in the world, shaking with silent sobs, clutching that small red car. Tears ran down his face unchecked. Isabella reached into her apron and pulled out a clean handkerchief. Her grandmother had taught her to always carry one. She walked forward slowly, her heart pounding. She didn't say anything. What could she say that wouldn't sound empty? Instead, she simply held out the handkerchief, her hand steady, even though everything inside her screamed to run. Thomas turned, and Isabella saw the moment he registered her presence. His face transformed from grief to shock to something harder, like anger. His jaw tightened. This was it, she thought. This was where she got fired. But she didn't drop her hand. She didn't apologize or back away. She just stood there, meeting his eyes with understanding, not pity. She'd been there too, in that place where grief was so big it had to come out. The silence stretched between them. Then something shifted in his expression. The anger didn't disappear exactly, but it softened around the edges. He looked at her hand, still extended with the simple white handkerchief, then back at her face. Really looked at her, maybe the first time he'd truly seen another human being in months. Slowly, almost uncertainly, Thomas reached out and took the handkerchief. His fingers brushed hers for just a second, and Isabella noticed how cold they were, despite the warm room. He turned away slightly, using the cloth to wipe his face, and Isabella understood. He needed privacy for this, needed to gather the pieces of himself back together. She turned to leave, giving him that dignity, her heart still racing, but somehow calmer now. She'd made it 3 steps toward the door when his voice stopped her. Wait. The word was rough. Barely more than a whisper, like he'd forgotten how to use his voice for anything other than giving orders or pushing people away. Isabella paused but didn't turn around, sensing that he might find this easier if she wasn't looking at him. What's your name? Isabella swallowed. Her mother was going to kill her, but she couldn't ignore a direct question. Isabella, sir. Another long silence. She could hear him breathing, trying to steady himself. Thank you, Isabella. 2 words. Simple words. But they sounded like they cost him everything he had left. Isabella nodded, even though he couldn't see it, and quietly left the room. Out in the hallway, she leaned against the wall, her legs suddenly shaky. What had she just done? She'd broken every rule her mother had laid out. She'd approached Thomas Crane, touched his hand, witnessed his most private moment of grief. She should feel terrified about losing this job they desperately needed. But all she felt was a strange kind of sadness mixed with something else. Hope, maybe? Because in that moment when their eyes met, she hadn't seen a billionaire or a boss or an untouchable figure of power. She'd seen someone drowning in pain, reaching for anything that might help him breathe. And she knew, somehow, that this was just the beginning. Then something shifted in his expression. The anger didn't disappear exactly, but it softened around the edges. Thomas looked at her hand, still extended with the simple white handkerchief, then back at her face. Really looked at her, maybe the first time he'd truly seen another human being in months. Slowly, almost uncertainly, He reached out and took the handkerchief. His fingers brushed hers for just a second, and Isabella noticed how cold they were, despite the warm room. He turned away slightly, using the cloth to wipe his face, and Isabella understood. He needed privacy for this, needed to gather himself back together. She turned to leave, giving him that dignity, her heart still racing. She'd made it 3 steps toward the door when his voice stopped her. Wait. The word was rough. Barely more than a whisper, like he'd forgotten how to use his voice for anything other than giving orders or pushing people away. Isabella paused but didn't turn around, sensing he might find this easier if she wasn't looking at him. What's your name? Isabella swallowed. Her mother was going to kill her, but she couldn't ignore a direct question. Isabella, sir. Another long silence. She could hear him breathing, trying to steady himself. Thank you, Isabella. 2 words. Simple words, but they sounded like they cost him everything he had left. Isabella nodded, even though he couldn't see it, and quietly left the room. Out in the hallway, she leaned against the wall, her legs suddenly shaky. What had she just done? She'd broken every rule her mother had laid out. She'd approached Thomas Crane, witnessed his most private moment. She should feel terrified about losing this job they desperately needed. But all she felt was a strange kind of sadness mixed with something else. Because in that moment when their eyes met, she hadn't seen a billionaire or a boss. She'd seen someone drowning in pain, reaching for anything that might help him breathe. The next morning, Isabella arrived expecting to be told not to come back. Instead, her mother pulled her aside with a worried expression. Mr. Crane's assistant called, Maria said quietly. He wants you to bring his breakfast to the library. You specifically. Isabella's stomach dropped. What? I don't know what happened yesterday, but be careful. Her mother's eyes searched her face. Did you do something? I just gave him a handkerchief. That's all. Maria closed her eyes briefly. But what could they do? When Thomas Crane made a request, you didn't refuse. Isabella carried the breakfast tray with shaking hands. When she entered the library, Thomas was at the window, but this time he turned when he heard her. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept. But his eyes were clearer somehow. Put it on the table, he said quietly. Isabella did as he asked, then stood there awkwardly. Thomas walked over but didn't sit down. Instead, he just stared at the food like he'd forgotten what to do with it. My wife used to make breakfast, he said suddenly. Every Sunday. Daniel would help. He'd crack the eggs and get shells everywhere. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. They'd make a huge mess, and it was perfect. Isabella didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. She just stood there, the way she'd learned to be with her own mother during hard days after her father died. Sometimes people didn't need words. They just needed someone to be there while they remembered. Thomas finally sat down. He picked up a fork, then put it down again. You can go, he said, but it didn't sound like an order. It sounded more like he was giving her permission to escape if she wanted to. Isabella nodded and left. But something had changed. She could feel it. The next morning, the same request came. And the morning after that. Within a week, it became routine. Isabella would bring breakfast, and they would exist in the same space together. Sometimes Thomas talked small things at first, memories that slipped out when he wasn't guarding himself. Sometimes they sat in silence, and that was okay too. Isabella learned things about him that would have surprised anyone who'd only seen the billionaire in the news. He still coded every night because it was the only thing that made his mind quiet. He'd met Catherine in college, where she studied art history, and he was building his first startup. Their son Daniel had loved dinosaurs and wanted to be a paleontologist, not a tech genius. And Thomas had been secretly thrilled. I never wanted him to feel pressured, Thomas said one morning, staring into his coffee. I wanted him to be whoever he wanted to be. I wanted him to have time to figure that out. His voice cracked on the last word. Time was the one thing money couldn't buy back. She started to share her own stories too, small pieces of her life that she offered carefully. She told him about her father, who'd worked in construction and died when a scaffold collapsed. About how her mother had worked 3 jobs to keep Isabella in school. About how Isabella was studying business because she wanted to build something that would make her parents proud. What kind of business? Thomas asked one morning. It was the first question he'd asked about her life. I don't know exactly yet, Isabella admitted. Something that helps people like my mom. People who work hard but never get ahead because the system isn't built for them. Thomas nodded slowly. For a moment, she thought she saw something spark in his eyes, some flicker of the entrepreneur he used to be. But then it faded. The employees in the building had noticed the change. Thomas was leaving his penthouse now, attending meetings, responding to emails. His assistant whispered to Maria that whatever Isabella was doing, she should keep doing it. But not everyone was happy about it. On Friday of Isabella's second week, a man in an expensive suit was waiting when she arrived. He introduced himself as Richard, Thomas's head of security. "I need to speak with you," he said. It wasn't a request. He led her to a small office. "I've worked for Mr. Crane for 10 years, he began. "I've seen people try to take advantage of him in his grief. People who think they can get close when he's vulnerable." Isabella's face burned. I'm not accusing you yet," Richard cut her off. "I'm warning you. Whatever this is, understand that you're a housekeeping employee, and he's one of the richest men in the world. That gap doesn't close just because you brought him breakfast a few times." The words stung because part of her had been thinking the same thing. What was she doing? "I'm just trying to help," she said quietly. "Are you? Or are you hoping for something more?" Richard's eyes were hard. "People talk. They're already wondering why he requested you specifically. Some are betting on when you'll ask for money or a favor." Isabella stood up, trembling with anger and humiliation. "I never asked him for anything. He talks, and I listen. That's all." "For now," Richard said. "But this needs to end soon. For your own good and his. Mr. Crane doesn't need complications. He needs professional help, not a teenager playing therapist." Isabella left the office feeling like she'd been slapped. The worst part was that Richard wasn't entirely wrong. Who was she to think she could help someone like Thomas Crane? She was just a college student who could barely afford textbooks. That evening, her mother noticed something was wrong. Over dinner in their small apartment, Isabella finally told her everything. The conversations, the routine, Richard's warning. Maria was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "That man is right about one thing. You're from different worlds. But he's wrong about something too. You're not playing therapist. You're being human. Sometimes that's what people need." "But what if I'm making things worse?" Isabella asked. "That's not your choice anymore," Maria said gently. "It's his. If Mr. Crane wants you to bring breakfast, you bring breakfast. If he wants to talk, you listen. But Mia, be careful with your own heart too. Don't start hoping for things that can't happen." Isabella nodded, but she wasn't sure if she was already too late. Monday morning came too quickly. Isabella woke up with a knot in her stomach, Richard's words still echoing in her head. Maybe he was right. Maybe she should ask Thomas to have someone else bring his breakfast. But when she arrived at the penthouse, her mother handed her the tray without a word. The look in Maria's eyes said everything. This was Thomas's choice to make, not theirs. Isabella knocked softly on the library door. "Come in," Thomas called out, as she pushed the door open, balancing the tray. He was sitting at his desk, laptop open, actually working. He looked up when she entered, and Isabella noticed he'd shaved. It was a small thing, but it felt significant. "Good morning," he said, gesturing to the usual spot. His voice was steadier than it had been in days. Isabella set down the tray and turned to leave, but Thomas spoke again. Richard talked to you on Friday. It wasn't a question. Isabella froze. Yes, sir. I didn't ask him to do that. Thomas closed his laptop. He thinks he's protecting me. He's wrong, but his intentions are good. Isabella waited. You don't have to keep bringing my breakfast if you don't want to, Thomas continued. I know this is unusual. I'm sure people are talking. If you prefer to go back to your regular duties, I understand. There it was. The out she'd been thinking about all weekend. All she had to do was nod and walk away. It would solve everything. Instead, she heard herself say, Do you want me to stop? Thomas was quiet. Then he shook his head slowly. No, I don't. Then I'll be here tomorrow, Isabella said simply. Something shifted in Thomas's expression. Relief, maybe. He sat down to eat for the first time in days without staring at the food like it was a stranger. Tell me about your classes, he said. What are you studying right now? And just like that, they fell back into their routine. But something was different. The air felt lighter, like they'd both made a choice and the weight of uncertainty had lifted over the next week. The conversations grew longer. Thomas asked more questions about her life, her studies, her dreams. When she mentioned struggling with an economics assignment, he spent 20 minutes explaining market theory in a way that made more sense than her textbook. You should be teaching this stuff, Isabella said. Scribbling notes on a napkin, Thomas smiled, a real smile. I used to give lectures sometimes. Guest speaking at universities. Catherine always said I got too excited about it, talked too fast. His smile faded slightly at the memory, but didn't disappear. She was right. Isabella noticed he was talking about Catherine more now, and about Daniel. The memories still hurt him, she could see it, but they didn't tear him apart the way they had before. He was learning to hold the pain and the love at the same time. One morning, Thomas surprised her by asking about her mother's surgery. Isabella hadn't mentioned it, had been careful not to bring up anything that might sound like she was asking for help. She's recovering well, Isabella said carefully. The surgery went fine. Good. Thomas nodded. Then, the employee health insurance should have covered it. We're not full-time employees, Isabella explained. Mom works contract hours. No benefits. Thomas's jaw tightened. That's going to change, he said quietly. He opened his laptop and typed something. I'm sorry. That shouldn't be the case. Isabella didn't know what to say. He wasn't offering charity. He was recognizing that something was wrong with the system. Later that day, Maria pulled Isabella aside. Mr. Crane's assistant just called. They're reviewing all contract worker arrangements. They want to offer me a full-time position with benefits. Isabella, did you say something to him? I just answered a question, Isabella said. I didn't ask for anything, I swear. Maria studied her daughter's face. I believe you. But Mia, this is what I was afraid of. When you exist in his world, everything changes. What happens when you go back to school and he forgets about us? I don't think he's like that, Isabella said, but doubt crept in. How well did she really know Thomas Crane? The next morning, Isabella brought breakfast, but felt nervous. Thomas noticed immediately. Something's wrong, he said. Isabella hesitated, then chose honesty. My mom's scared. About the job offer, about all of this. She thinks when I leave, things will go back to how they were. Thomas set down his coffee. Your mother is protecting you. I understand that. But Isabella, I'm not offering her a position because of you. I'm doing it because it should have been done years ago. I stopped seeing the people who actually keep my company running. That's on me, not you. But you only notice because of me, Isabella pointed out. You're right, Thomas admitted. You made me see a lot of things I'd stopped paying attention to. But the changes I'm making aren't contingent on you being here. Your mother earned that position through 15 years of excellent work. Isabella wanted to believe him, but Richard's words kept haunting her. Thomas sighed. Richard got to you, didn't he? Made you question everything? He wasn't wrong about some things, Isabella said quietly. He was wrong about the most important thing, Thomas said firmly. He thinks you're here because you want something from me. But you're here because you saw someone in pain and you didn't look away. That's not manipulation. That's humanity. But what is this? Isabella asked, the question that had been building finally spilling out. I don't understand what we're doing. You're a billionaire and I'm a community college student. In 3 weeks, I go back to school and you go back to running your empire. Where does this fit into real life? Thomas was quiet for a long moment. I don't have all the answers, Isabella. I'm still figuring out how to get through each day. But I know that these mornings are the only time I feel like I can breathe. You don't need me to be anything other than what I am right now, a person trying to survive grief. That's rare. That's valuable. I don't want to be your therapist, Isabella said. That's not fair to either of us. You're not, Thomas said. You're my friend. At least, I hope you are. Is that allowed? Can a billionaire and a college student be friends, or are the rules too complicated? The word friend settled something in Isabella's chest. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't charity. It was just two people who'd found something real in an unexpected place. I think we can try, Isabella said softly. Thomas smiled, and it reached his eyes for the first time since she'd met him. Good, because I have a question for you, friend to friend. What? Your business idea. The one about helping people like your mother. Have you actually worked on it, or is it just something you think about? Isabella felt her face flush. I've sketched out some ideas. Nothing serious. I don't have the money to start anything, and honestly, I don't really know where to begin. Thomas leaned forward, and Isabella saw a spark of something she hadn't seen before. Energy, interest, the brilliant entrepreneur coming back to life. Tell me your ideas. Not because I'm going to fund them or take them over. Just because I'm curious. Sometimes the best way to figure out if something works is to talk it through. And so Isabella started talking, hesitant at first, then gaining confidence as Thomas asked questions that pushed her thinking deeper. He didn't give her answers or solutions. He just listened and challenged her to refine her ideas, the way a mentor should. Outside the library windows, the sun climbed higher. Neither of them noticed the time passing. For the first time in months, Thomas Crane was thinking about the future instead of drowning in the past. And Isabella was learning that sometimes the most unexpected connections teach us exactly what we need to know. When she finally left the library, 2 hours later, her head spinning with ideas and possibilities, Isabella realized something had shifted. This wasn't just about helping a grieving man anymore. It was about two people helping each other become better versions of themselves.